G'day, mate 40 here. So I don't understand why there's not more attention paid to the drinking of Kamala Harris. Right, it's indisputable. No one denies. She accepts she loves to drink. And she has an encyclopedic knowledge of wine. Right, her alcohol preferences are amply documented. She is a known connoisseur of alcohol, of wine in particular. Right. So this is widely known. There have been numerous mainstream news articles about how much she loves to drink. And we also know that Amy Chozick, longtime New York Times reporter on Hillary Clinton, also said Hillary Clinton loved to drink. So why isn't there more curiosity paid to how much Kamala loves to drink and whether he has a problem in that regard? And on Mark Halperin's show today, Greg Kelly from Newsmax called in this morning and said that he has personal experience with alcoholism. He became sober about 6-8 years ago, and to him it's obvious that Kamala has a drinking problem. And then Mark Halperin stumped him with a good basic question: what's the strongest piece of evidence? And Greg Kelly didn't have an answer. So after Kamala Harris's appearance at the National Association of Black Journalists yesterday, there were many comments on X noting that she sounds drunk. Now, I have at times been accused of sounding drunk, and I don't drink. So just because people are accusing Kamala Harris of sounding drunk doesn't mean that she is drunk, doesn't mean that she has a drinking problem. But why isn't there more interest in how much Kamala Harris loves to drink? And it seems like a vital question, and we know she loves to drink. And so what are her drinking habits? How much alcohol does she typically consume a day, a week? When does she drink? This seems to me a matter of vital national importance. We're about to elect a president of the United States who loves to drink. Right? We're going to have the ship of state in the hands of somebody who loves to drink. As a public, well-documented, reported on by many outlets, she loves to drink. She loves wine, and she has a great deal of knowledge about wine. So why isn't there more curiosity about how much Kamala loves to drink and whether that ever impinges on her work performance, and whether it might help explain or entirely explain many of her bizarre public appearances, including yesterday at the National Association of Black Journalists. Now, Mark Halperin and Sean Spicer and Tim, the Democratic consultant, said that they were not aware of anything that Kamala said at the NABJ that diminished her chances of winning the election. But you have all these reports on X that she loves to drink. So what the heck is going on there? And why isn't this of interest to journalists? And the reaction on Mark Halperin's show by Sean Spicer and company was, oh, I don't want to touch that with a 100-foot pole. And Tim, the Democratic activist, was just outraged. That's absolute poison to even bring that up. But why? Why is that absolute poison to bring up? Shouldn't this be the most obvious thing that we investigate? If presidential candidate has a history of risky sexual liaisons, right? Surely in this day and age we'd know about that. If a presidential candidate has a love of gambling, right, you think we'd know about that. if presidential candidate has a love of risky activities, you'd think you'd know about that. And drinking is a risky activity for a substantial part of the American population. So why don't we get some just solid reporting on how much does Kamala love to drink? What does that translate into? What does she drink? How much does she drink? When does she drink? To what extent does it affect her work performance? To what extent does she say things that are indiscreet under the influence of alcohol? Right? She is going to possess the nation's most closely held secrets if she becomes president of the United States. Right? It would seem like there's an obvious, commonsensical need to understand, does her drinking pose any issues with regard to her work performance and with regard to her discretion? And the answer might well be no. Presents absolutely no problem. Well, then we should know about that. Right? So Kamala loves to drink, very clear, open. She loves to drink, and she has a vast knowledge of wine. So what does that mean? She has a strict 2-drink limit or 1-drink limit. What's her history with alcohol? Have there been times in her life where she's been drinking to excess? How does it affect her personality when she becomes intoxicated? But nobody on camera on Mark Halperin's show was willing to field the question. And I'm kind of used to this because I've been reporting on and commenting on things that you're not supposed to talk about for decades, right? I started blogging in July 3, 1997, and I kept writing stories that you weren't supposed to comment on publicly. So there'd be all these porn actors and actresses who test HIV positive, but it was widely considered a story too icky. Other journalists didn't want to touch. The mayor of Los Angeles stopped wearing his wedding ring, Antonio Villaraigosa, for about 8 months. But no journalist thought that was a story until I raised it. I remember when I was reporting for Cahill News in 1986, right, I was interviewing political candidates on election night, and this one political candidate I was interviewing was clearly drunk, and I didn't have any background with alcohol because I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist. We didn't drink. There was no drinking in my community or in my family, and so really didn't know anything about what drunk people are like. But then one day I came to work, and the person who was supposed to anchor the morning news, he was sitting at the console looking busted, and he turned to me and said, "Luke, do you know what alcoholism is?" I don't remember how I answered. But anyway, he was an alcoholic. He would stay up all night drinking, and then he'd come to the station hammered. And I never noticed it, but someone else at the station noticed it and got him into rehab. He got fired, but they managed to keep him on the health insurance plan so he could go to rehab. But just as you would want people who hold vital secrets to be discreet and use good judgment with their sex life, and why, for example, homosexuals were forbidden from occupying many roles in U.S. government because it was thought that their homosexuality would make them an easier victim for blackmail. So too, someone who drinks to excess and doesn't use great judgment with regard to their drinking, right, is going to be dangerous. This is going to be the most powerful person in the world. Right? So why wouldn't we want to investigate what the heck this means? But what struck me was how nobody in polite company there wanted to touch the story. Mark Halprin says, any of you guys want to touch this story with a 100-foot pole? And none of them wanted to touch it, but it's a completely legitimate story. Kamala Harris loves to drink. Does it interfere with the performance of her duties? And what is her history with alcohol? Has it interfered with the performance of her duties in the past? Has she become indiscreet when drunk? Right? What sort of performance should we expect from the next president of the United States? Now, for decades, the mainstream media publication with the least inhibition about posting, right? The American newspaper with the least concern for nailing down facts is the New York Post. So even the New York Post isn't tackling Kamala's drinking. And so we had a Trump campaign political director say that they had first-person reports of Kamala having a drinking problem, but nobody's come forward, and early voting is going to begin soon. So if the Trump campaign really has the goods on Kamala Harris's drinking problem, wouldn't they have released it by now? And why have no journalists or political operatives shown much interest? Pages have a right to defend themselves. She has a 60% disapproval rating. No, she doesn't. Local polls say that she seems to have a dramatically higher approval rating. So Kamala Harris's approval rating is going up, right? It's not going down. It's not heading in the opposite direction. Like, all the poll results since the debate with Donald Trump have been positive for Kamala Harris. To the best of my knowledge, universally, across the board, poll results, favorability has been just going up for Kamala Harris, and she is reaching all-time highs in polling. And she does not have apparently a higher disapproval than an approval rating. Now, there's a purported affidavit that's getting circulated online from an ABC News employee who's not a journalist but is in the technical side of things, or at least that's the claim, that ABC News rigged the debate. And it makes all sorts of specific allegations, but the affidavit seems so flimsy, so unreliable, that no one in the mainstream media is picking it up. All right, Megyn Kelly has devoted 2 segments of her show to it. ABC News has denied some of the allegations in the purported affidavit. But if the New York Post won't pick up the story, right, that's a tip-off that nobody in the news media yet considers it credible. So the affidavit contains all sorts of allegations that, if true, that will be revealed in the days ahead. And if true, they would be incredibly damaging for Kamala Harris and ABC News. But given that even the New York Post, which has the lowest editorial standards of any mainstream American newspaper, even the New York Post won't touch this story. Right? The New York Post broke the Hunter Biden laptop story, but New York Post is not even touching the Kamala has a drinking problem story, and not touching this purported affidavit from a purported ABC News employee making allegations about the underhanded way that ABC News cooperated with the Trump campaign to rig the debate in Kamala Harris's favor. So Kamala Harris spent much of her childhood in Canada. Very suspicious. But I don't recall much reporting on that part of her life. We could very well see her win the presidency of the United States, right? And she would be fundamentally as unknown as Barack Obama when he won the presidency, right? Journalists didn't seem particularly eager into digging into Barack Obama's story. But Barack Obama and Kamala Harris share a lot of similarities in that Barack Obama didn't really consider himself black until about age 25, when he saw a tremendous career advantage for identifying as black. So he wasn't considered black by his friends prior to age 25, and black people did not consider him black. But then Barack Obama is about to graduate from Harvard Law, and he saw a tremendous career advantage in identifying as black. But prior to that, he was just another exotic person coming out of Hawaii, where there's a tremendous amount of interracial marriage, and he was just considered exotic. So think about Malcolm Gladwell. When he arrived on the scene in American journalism, he was known as a white Canadian conservative. And then author Malcolm Gladwell saw all sorts of career advantages to embracing his black identity, and he started growing out this big afro to emphasize his black identity. And then there are a lot of light-skinned people who in America understood to be white, but in Jamaica, the Caribbean, no, in the Caribbean they're understood to be white, but in the United States they're understood to be black. So there is an element of choice and subjectivity in racial identification. So Kamala Harris was not as decisive as Barack Obama. Obama deciding at age 25 to identify as black. All right, she chose to go to a historical black college, so her identity as black, in addition to being Indian, goes back to childhood and is much more authentic and long-running than Barack Obama's. So walking onto the UCLA campus, where we should be having some vicious anti-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas riots in the next couple of weeks. But UCLA, which has overcome UC Berkeley as the nation's top public university, right? UCLA is a much more hedonistic and easygoing campus compared to Berkeley. So UC Berkeley was racked by riots in the 1960s. But UCLA's riots were a very pale imitation in the 1960s of what was going on at Berkeley. So Berkeley is hardcore, right? Hardcore with their academics, hardcore with their rioting, hardcore with their leftism. The neighborhood is much grittier, right? It's just a much different campus from UCLA. So when you walk around UCLA, there's no sense of menace, right? There's no sense of these vast simmering hatreds just under the surface, right? UCLA does not have a history of violent riots. Overwhelmingly, UCLA is a chill campus. It's historically been an overwhelmingly Asian campus with a high number of Jews. So the violence that broke out with the pro-Palestine riots a few months ago was quite the anomaly in UCLA history. So the addition of a small percentage of hardcore radicals can shake up an entire campus. In addition, Israel is fighting the longest war of its life as a nation. So the situation externally is different with Israel and its wars on numerous fronts. And then the student body composition at UCLA is changed. But when you walk around right now, and we've got about 10 days to go before classes start, right, there's just no sense of rage, resentment, violence just simmering under the surface. So in some of the reporting on the Hezbollah pager explosions and their two-way radios now exploding today, I read allegations from various human rights groups that what Israel did apparently was a violation of human rights because they employed booby traps. And the use of booby traps is a violation of international humanitarian law. So the direction of international humanitarian law has steadily trended since the 1960s in the direction of providing more and more protection for terrorists, for people who fight outside of uniform, and less protection for societies waging counterinsurgency techniques such as Israel. But to be fair, I looked up, is Hezbollah's bombing of Israel and Israeli civilians, is that a violation of international humanitarian law? And it is. Oh, so this is the trope that I kept seeing in the news over today with regard to Israel. Stunning technological achievement by Israel, but how does it advance its strategic goals? And so the strategic goals, as envisioned by the mainstream media, is they don't understand why Israel would have any strategic goal greater than retrieving its hostages and de-escalating its wars with Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. I think that's incredibly naive. Right? Israel has all sorts of incentives for escalating. Israel is escalating even against American demands that it not escalate. A wider war would likely work to the advantage of Israel. And a strategic goal of making life difficult for your enemy, strategic goal of maiming potential assassins and terrorists before they can maim and kill you, right? That just makes common sense to me, right? You kill your enemy, you wound your enemy, you destroy your enemy's morale, you make life more difficult for the enemy by creating ever more incentives for the people around your enemy, right? The other citizens of Lebanon to hate Hezbollah, to want to keep as much distance from Hezbollah as possible. To me, these are commonsensical strategic goals. Right? How is that not a strategic goal? Just as Donald Trump has a strategic goal, or should have, when he speaks publicly, that he wants to incentivize his supporters into showing up at the polls and rallying for him, while minimizing the incentives for his enemies to do the same thing. My God, these brilliant UCLA students riding around on these e-bikes without wearing a helmet. Right, they have such a bright future in front of them, and yet they can't even be bothered wearing a helmet to protect those brilliant, high-functioning brains. So I thought, it was someone who's pro-Israel, I thought it was brilliant that today you had two-way radios used by Hezbollah exploding all over Lebanon. And to me, this is a finely tuned attack, right? Not just anyone got these pages, for example, right? These were battalion leaders and above who got these pagers that Israel blew up. And not just anyone would get two-way radios as well. Right? They don't hand them out like candy. Right? They save them for particularly valuable members of their terrorist organization. And that these devices that they're using to plot terror attacks on Israel explode is just beautiful karmic justice. What I can't figure out is why Israel did not then launch an offensive, right? You have Hezbollah unable to communicate. Right, you have thousands of its fighters wounded. You have the organization in chaos. It seems like the perfect time to attack southern Lebanon and restore safety for 60,000 plus Israelis to return to northern Israel. So Israel will have to invade southern Lebanon to take out Hezbollah strongholds. And this seemed like the perfect occasion to do that. And yet Israel did not strike. Not sure why. Can't figure that out. Let's have a look at the chat. Okay, Fahad, good to see you. So why are we living in a dream world? Right? Hezbollah was just devastated. Why would Israel not invade? I don't know how to invite you on right now. I'm just operating from my phone. But stay in touch, Fahad. Definitely get you on future streams. People have many aims in life, all right? Politics isn't just the only aim that even the most dedicated political activists have. So even terrorists have affection for their families. So you had this one modern Orthodox professor at Bar Ilan University said the only way to stop terrorism is to do horrible things to the female members of a terrorist family. So even terrorists tend to love their mothers and have protective impulses towards their sisters and the female members of their family. And even terrorists have competing goals. And so the more painful, the more difficult, the more challenging, the more disheartening, the more demoralizing you make it for people to be terrorists for Hezbollah, right? The more they'll be incentivized to choose other occupations and other pursuits and other goals. And if Hezbollah is so incompetent that Israel can hack all their pages and two-way radios and blow up thousands of them, right, that's going to be devastating for Hezbollah morale. If you're on the sidelines in Hezbollah, why would you not consider a different occupation? There's protests in Israel every day before and after October 7. Yeah, so there's an Ashkanazi, generally left-wing elite that has historically run Israel. But Bibi Netanyahu's government depends upon support from Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews. And since the 1990s, Israel's Supreme Court has seized for itself the ability to invalidate any legislation passed by Parliament if it considers it illegitimate. So Israel's legal system is dominated by these smart Ashkenazi lefties, and they have seized for themselves the right to invalidate the decisions of the elected representatives of the nation of Israel. And so that's why Bibi Netanyahu wanted to push through judicial reforms so that Israel would be better equipped to govern without allowing unelected judges to rule invalid parliamentary legislation. And so one reason Israel's military response on October 7 was so inept is that Israel's Attorney General would not allow Israel's Air Force to attack these thousands of Hamas terrorists flowing into southern Israel. And until the Attorney General signed off, the Israeli Air Force couldn't get into the game. So hundreds of Israelis were slaughtered and raped because the Ashkenazi legal establishment has seized for itself unprecedented powers compared to any other functioning democracy of which I'm aware, where they can just by fiat decide that this or that government ruling is illegitimate. And so these left-wing Ashkenazi judges, they made it very difficult for Israel's frontline soldiers to shoot when you had provocations coming from the other side of the line. So you would have these Hamas agitators and Gazan agitators who'd come up to the border with Israel and start throwing rocks. And the soldiers had to hold their fire, under very extreme inhibitory legislation that did not allow Israel to properly defend itself. And so the Ashkanazi elite dominate Israel's economy. They dominate the smartest Israelis. And they are international in their orientation. They want approval from the International Criminal Court. They want approval from Europe and from other elites around the world. And they're so desperate for this approval, they're willing to risk Israel's safety. And they do risk Israel's safety. And so the anti-Bibi Netanyahu protest movement encouraged Israeli men not to fulfill their duty in the IDF reserves. And so Israelis stopped showing up for their reserve duty. The Air Force became undermanned. Critical infrastructure was undermanned. The ability of the Israeli defense forces to defend Israel was severely undermined by this left-wing, dominantly Ashkenazi elite protest against Bibi Netanyahu and his judicial reforms. And they overwhelmingly stymied Bibi's judicial reforms. And they kneecapped Israel's ability to defend itself. And now, when Hamas slaughtered 6 Israeli hostages 3 weeks ago, the Ashkenazi will say, this is Bibi Netanyahu's fault. And they blame Bibi Netanyahu for not reaching a deal with Yahya Sinwar and Hamas to free the hostages. But there are 2 parties for this negotiation. And the more pressure you put on Bibi, and more difficult you make it for Netanyahu to govern, the less likely Hamas and Sinwar are to reach some kind of hostage deal. Because they see this is playing to their advantage, Israel has a 5th column of its lefty Ashkenazi elite who are systematically kneecapping the country, diminishing its ability to defend itself. Tell me why England stopped selling weapons to Israel because the Labour Party is dominated by Muslims. Muslims now make up about 10% of England's population. And to pay off a key constituency, the new government of the United Kingdom is turning away from Israel and instead, right, it's taking more and more the side of Israel's enemies. And this is the result of Muslims in the United Kingdom making up an increasingly important part of the Labour Party and its vote and its enthusiasm. So you have large parts of the English establishment that are unwilling to say no to Muslims. So you had these Pakistani groomer gangs operating for years, just raping hundreds of young white English girls. And the police establishment, the legal establishment, the political establishment in England knowingly turned a blind eye to these massive Muslim grooming gangs that were systematically raping hundreds of English women. And so, because Muslims are able to march, they have a great deal of communal solidarity and in-group identity. They punch above their weight with their ability to disrupt society. And so many countries such as the United Kingdom, you have Western elites trying to placate the radical terrorism supporting Muslims in their midst, hoping that will buy them off from committing acts of terror. Good luck with that.